Every empire, however, tells itself and the world that it is unlike all other empires, that its mission is not to plunder and control, but to educate and liberate. Professor Edward Said. Welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News. I'm your host, Greg Stoker, and we're going to be talking about how the America as an empire is in decline. The American empire is in decline. And last Tuesday, the majority of voting Americans chose to hasten that decline by electing former President Trump. So join us tonight to examine Trump's incoming cabinet, immigration policy, stance toward Israel and Iran, and also to talk about why the Democratic Party is collapsing and absolutely will not save you from fascism. So we're going to get into that. Now, first of all, sorry for the poor video quality. I'm in a hotel in Atlanta, and the internet sucks, so I'm just using my MacBook camera, so it's not great. Also, it's so humid here that my hair is doing really wild things, so just don't even worry about it, and we're going to go ahead and start talking about Trump, liberalism, capitalism, decline of empire, and speaking of capitalism, Patreon, y'all, if you want to support what we do here, Mint Press News is a small independent newsroom with no corporate sponsorships, and we're just trying to make it, in this late stage capitalist dystopia. So if you want to sling us $5 a month, that's great. If you can't swing it or you don't want to swing it, if you like, comment, share, spread the word, helps. We're just glad you're here. So we can we're going to play some B-roll of Trump. Just get ready. Just get ready to be seeing this dude all the time. So if the U.S. election results from last week surprised you, then you haven't really been paying attention. So you can make me big and Trump small, right, Jim? All right. So you haven't really been paying very close attention to the coalescing social, economic, and political problems in America, an empire in decline. Last Tuesday, the majority of voting Americans, as we already said, chose to, hasten it. They think they're saving it, but it's not going to happen. But this is all happening because of a lot of different reasons. But for right now, we're going to be focusing on the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party's collapse is manifest and undeniable and validates left-wing critiques of its rightward drift, empty identity politics, and they're not empty, okay? Because they're not. But that's how a lot of people in the center, even center left, see what they call wokeism. That's beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but I don't want to say they're empty identity politics. It's just how they're viewed and how people are feeling about them in general terms. So, and a lack of an egalitarian and progressive economic agenda. While this may be validating for leftists who were criticized, lampooned, and defamed by Democratic Party elites for warning about this collapse, the decades-long failure of the Democratic Party to become a bastion of the working class, not just the white working class, which is a loaded term that's used by the Trump campaign, but the actual working class, has paved the way for a full-on fascist and ultimately self-destructive takeover of the United States. And predictably, self-identifying liberal elites are now raising their voices to cast blame on everyone but themselves, voices that were previously silent about the genocide in Palestine, the betrayals of progressive climate and immigration policies by the Biden administration, and the suppression, of Stop Cop City and environmental activists in Atlanta. And while they decry the downfall of democracy, it's unlikely that they will learn from their mistakes and will be sublimated into a junior partner in an overridingly fascist system rather than alter course and become a truly radical party. So here we are, locked in support of two highly visible forever wars in Ukraine and West Asia, and a very unpredictable president-elect with clear signs of cognitive decline. It's difficult to say with certainty what he will do. Most of his policy positions, right, are mutable and vague. But here are 7 action items that Trump has discussed previously throughout his career and on the campaign trail. And it seems like insofar as he's willing to implement anything, he's going to pursue this, especially the last couple items. So one, his main thing is deport undocumented migrants. While campaigning, Trump promised the biggest mass deportations of undocumented workers in U.S. history, with many experts warning that deportations on the scale promised by Trump will face huge legal and logistical challenges and could slow economic growth. Yeah, that's putting it mildly. I think that's how the BBC phrased it. Oh, it'll do a lot more than slow economic growth. And we're going to get into that. So, moves on tax and tariffs. Trump has promised sweeping tax cuts, extending his 2017 overhaul by abolishing tax on Social Security payments and implementing further corporate tax cuts. He has also promised to implement punitive tariffs against China, which will drive up prices for ordinary people. I think some of his supporters are just starting to learn that actually tariffs aren't going to be paid by China. You know, that they're under the impression that all the tariffs, all the negative costs for the tariffs will be eaten by China. They're starting to realize, like, oh, okay, that's not really how that works. So deportation, tax and tariffs. 3, slash climate regulations, ostensibly to help the American car industry and increase the production of U.S. fossil fuels. 4, and we're going to be focusing on this one as well, end the war in Ukraine. Trump wants the U.S. to disentangle itself from foreign conflicts generally. Regarding the war in Gaza, Trump has positioned himself as a staunch supporter of Israel, but has urged the our American ally, to end its war by the time he's sworn into office. That's probably not going to happen, and he's probably not going to actually pressure Israel to stop doing anything. He did, after all, take, $100 million from Miriam Adelson, a Zionist mob boss, in order to get his support to annex the West Bank. So wouldn't hold he might be against the war in Ukraine, but staunch supporter of Israel. He has also said there's not going to be an a federal abortion ban. Trump said during the presidential debate with Harris that he would not sign into law a national abortion ban, but who knows? Leaving the decision up to individual states. I wouldn't trust that. He's tried to distance himself from like Project 2025 and stuff like that, but come on, dude. Point 6, he wants to pardon a lot of January 6 rioters. Obviously, because that's what a good dictator should do, free his cronies. And 7, fire special counsel Jack Smith, who is leading 2 investigations against him. So those are 7 points. We're going to be focusing on deportations, maybe some tax and tariffs, but mainly deportations and his stance on the war in Ukraine and Israel, because they have consequences not just for how politics is going to go down in America, but also how that's going to be exported to Western Europe, as there's a bent towards becoming more and more right-wing. So join us tonight on State of Play to examine Trump's incoming cabinet, his promised policies mentioned above, and what they would mean for America and, again, the world in general. Well, it's going to empower a lot of right-wing politics. So first, I wanted to circle back before we really get into it to the Dems losing, because it's a sign of things to come. You know, I'm going to just restart this over. It's a sign of things to come. There's a global shift towards right-wing politics, and now that Trump is president, alt-right leaders will be emboldened in y'all's own countries, just like last time. Only this iteration, this 47th presidency, will be far worse. And look, we got to talk about capitalism, because liberals refuse to even incorporate a milquetoast, center-left, democratic socialist analysis of capitalism, which is too weak tea for me personally. But it's why all their takes about how Trump got elected are so wildly off base. First of all, just chalking it up to racism and misogyny. Yeah, while completely valid, you're going to miss the point all the time. Every time. That's a huge part of it. But come on, guys. Like, the self-described liberal has no idea about what liberalism actually is. They cannot connect the term with human rights and equity and they connect the term with human rights and equity and progress, but no, liberalism eventually, inevitably collapses into fascism. So there was a recent 200-word post by Jason Hickel, a senior fellow at the London School of Economics, about this. And for like the next 5 minutes, I'm going to switch between that, because it's like great commentary, and my own. So when it comes to this issue, the problem with liberalism is that it rests on a fundamental contradiction that cannot be resolved. It will always fail, it will always collapse, and this explains everything about our current moment. So, liberals, self described liberals, try to hold two commitments at once. On one hand, they are firmly committed to capitalism. On the other, they express support for principles like human rights, democracy, equality, free speech, the environment, and the rule of law. This duality is actually the core of liberalism, right? So, real quick, that's why we say that under neoliberal structures, human rights are selective. Like Putin, war crimes in Ukraine, bad, but Bibi Netanyahu is doing what he must. So, yeah, there is not a universal application of moral standards. It only matters when it serves the interest of our allies, of capital, etc. So human rights are selected under liberal structures. At most, they may try to negotiate. This is the Dems. At most, they may. The result in. Yeah. So here's the main problem. Sorry. Yes. Capital accumulation requires cheapening labor and nature. This eventually comes into direct conflict with principles like rights and equality. And whenever this conflict appears, the liberal ruling class sides with capital, abandons their lofty principles, and throws workers and nature under the bus every single time. And we're going to be looking at some statements by Democratic contributors later on. So this results, of course, as we know, in these like flagrant displays of hypocrisy. They run on nice sounding platforms, but end up either betraying their promises or actively working against their stated values. So they'll slash public services, bail out banks, imprison journalists, beat up students. All this happened under Democratic leadership. Expand fracking. Again, Harris said she was going to frack until you can't frack no more. Not a direct quote, but like I'm paraphrasing. Bomb liberation movements in the global South, fund a genocide. This was not conservatives that were controlling the House, and this was not conservatives controlling the White House. They'll even trash international law itself, as you saw, anything that's needed to maintain the conditions for capital accumulation. So, guys, at most, they'll try to negotiate mediocre compromises, a few social policies here and there, some abortion rights, a tiny increase in minimum wage. And we can talk about that, how it's not really increased, but nothing that might pose any serious threat to, again, as Jason Hinkle says, capital accumulation. Thus, the soul-crushing slowness of liberal incrementalism. So that's kind of like what Harris preached, right? We just need to get in office and slowly, over time, we can make slow, responsible, steady progress. And that's what we call liberal incrementalism. It doesn't work. It's never worked. And we're going to look at the the immigration crisis, the deportation crisis, and really get into how that's crap. Thus, ultimately, they are unwilling to take any of the obvious steps that would actually resolve our urgent social and ecological crises, right? This is why, in the end, the majority of Americans don't trust liberal politicians. This is why they come across as so fantastically insincere and even sneering. Like their entire Harris campaign was positioned to appeal to the elite, right? So I'm speaking. If you want, say that. If you want Trump to win, that's why nobody trusts them. And so this is why they seem like spineless and empty. The center cannot hold, right? Because liberalism will always collapse, inevitably handing power to fascists. And this is not acceptable, as Jason Hinkle is saying. There's only one way to overcome this deadly impasse, he argues, and that is to mobilize a socialist alternative, a political movement that can unite the working classes, plural, because when people say like working class, I kind of get like, oh, are they doing like being like class reductionists and only talking about white people? So that's an important thing that I like to bring up too. Overcome capitalism, deliver real economic democracy, and enable us to achieve rapid progress towards social and economic goals. So now that context is established, we just went on a kind of rant about why liberal capitalism will never work out. Now that we've established that, let's look at some pretty good reporting by MSNBC. You might be shocked, but one host does it right.
To the Democratic Party after Donald Trump's victory was just how well Trump did with working class voters of all races. An economic realignment of sorts underway for years came.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about how, it was just, white people voted for Trump. But like the data, and again, exit polls aren't great. I have a huge problem with exit polls. So when he says working classes of all races, I mean, that is supported by what we have with exit polls. Again, exit polls are completely problematic. The data is always skewed. So take that with a grain of salt, but let's continue.
Back to bite the Democrats, according to some. And it has many wondering, how did the party of FDR, Social Security, Medicare, and labor become the party of high-income voters? And how did the party of Donald Trump and Elon Musk win with voters who make less than $100,000 a year?
It's a great question that everybody should be asking themselves. You guys already know the answer, probably.
Senator Bernie Sanders kicked off the debate this week by saying that Democrats have abandoned the working class. In a conversation with the New York Times, the former House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, shot back. And this is how she explained the Democrats losing ground with working class.
Okay, guys, this interview with Pelosi, I listened to it, and it is the most gaslighty, off-base, out-of-touch thing I've ever heard. I think The Daily did it, like the New York Times podcast did the original interview or something. Wow. You don't have to watch it, but if you want a case study in like gaslighting and being completely wrong and having all the wrong takes, you should watch this in its entirety.
Well, there are cultural issues involved in elections as well. Guns, God, and gays. That's the way they say it. Guns, that's an issue. Gays, that's an issue. Now they're making the trans issue such an important issue in their priorities.
Now, Sanders responded to Pelosi's rebuke this morning.
No, yeah, and she said the Democrats are the party of the working class, and then, of course, Bernie Sanders is pushing back on that, and because they're demonstrably not.
During an interview with my colleague Kristen Welker on NBC's Meet the Press.
Bottom line, if you're an average working person out there, do you really think that the Democratic Party is going to the mats, taking on powerful special interest and fighting for you? I think the overwhelming answer is no.
Now, Sanders made a lot of these same arguments after the Democrats lost to Trump in 2016, but many Democrats weren't listening. This time around, though, he has some surprising new backers, like Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who is far, far from a left-wing Democrat. This is what he...
Okay, no, this is an important tweet because he accidentally says the quiet part out loud, and kind of confirms like everything that we're saying right now.
He posted on X. It was a long thread, but part of it reads, when progressives like Bernie aggressively go after the elites that hold people down, they are shunned as dangerous populists. Why? Maybe because true economic populism is bad for our high-income base.
True economic populism is bad for our high-income base. And what he means by high-income base is the donor class of the Democratic National Convention. So the DNC. Yeah. So all of these politicians are saying that what is their base? It's not the working class, as Pelosi asserts. It's the donor class, which, most of us aren't. And that's what, and they're saying that their base is high income, and that's what they appeal to. And so they're blown away when a populist, like a fascist white supremacist idiot like Trump, appeals to the non-high income base, which is most people. He won the popular vote with fewer people voting for him than last time.
We cannot be afraid of fights, especially with the economic elites who have profited off of neoliberalism. Democrats, like the Harris campaign, are tepid in our fights with billionaires and corporations.
but then what is your high income base that you're appealing to? I mean, there's some dissonance going on in this tweet, but anyways,
And real economic populism should be our tentpole. But it's not just Senator Murphy who has, been Bernie-pilled. Conservative New York Times columnist David Brooks, who has written columns like this one from 2020 called "No, Not Sanders, Not Ever," had this to say after Trump's victory. "I'm a moderate. I like it when Democrat candidates run to the center, but I have to confess that Harris did that pretty effectively, and it did not work. Maybe the Democrats have to embrace a Bernie Sanders-style disruption."
Yes, you would. I mean, I have all the problems with Bernie that you want. At least he's more progressive than anyone else they're putting. I like a Democrat that runs to the center. No, she was running to the right. So let's talk about that. So first of all, I just wanted to say, before we start getting into Trump in the second half of this, the Democratic Party will not save you. Over the course of the campaign, it became clear that Harris would de-emphasize Biden's attacks on big companies in favor of a more conciliatory approach that she hoped would appeal to moderates. She wanted corporate leaders in her camp as she tried to outrun the progressive reputation that she had gained during the 2020 presidential primary race and to blunt Trump's attacks that she was a communist. So she was trying to prove that she wasn't a communist. I mean, I think to any of us who are kind of literate in, Marxism, perhaps, the idea that she is anywhere near, not just communism, anywhere near socialism is quite laughable and completely absurd. So Charles Myers, a fundraiser for Harris and the chairman and founder of Signum Global Advisors, said, quote, again, he's a fundraiser for Harris, "We are a center-right country. One of the few things we all agree on as Americans is the American dream, and a very big part of the American dream is the accumulation of wealth." Again, that's coming from Charles Myers, a fundraiser and chairman and founder of Signum Global Advisors. So he's a main Democratic delegate, and he's saying we're a center-right country because we're all about the accumulation of wealth. Anyways, we're going to finish this segment off a little bit, and then we're going to see, why Trump's appeal and how it's going to be horrible for all of us.
Something that will make people like me feel uncomfortable. And then there's good
We wouldn't want all the centrists to feel uncomfortable.
reason for Brooks' change of hearts. On election night, despite Trump winning a decisive victory and Republicans retaking the Senate and likely the House, voters also voted in favor of progressive ballot measures like raising the minimum wage and paid sick leave. And this was in red states like Arizona, Missouri, and Alaska. There's also logic behind Senator Murphy's fear that Bernie-style populism, even after this election, will get shut down by Democrats that are elite. If you
Yeah, obviously. That's why the Democratic Party is never going to save you.
And remember, early on in Harris's campaign, she briefly took a populist tone and went on the attack against big business. Then that populism somehow disappeared as quickly as it came. Well, according to The Atlantic, Harris's brother-in-law, Tony West, who also happens to be Uber's chief legal officer, was behind that change in tone. He reportedly pushed for Harris to win over more CEOs and billionaires like Mark Cuban, who became one of the campaign's chief surrogates. Now, this tracks with reporting late in the campaign where Harris's team was bragging to the New York Times about how Wall Street was shaping her agenda. So even if Democrats do come to their senses and try to start adopting Sanders-style populism, how do they free themselves of big business when it's become so intertwined with the party? Political campaigns require gigantic sums of money, regardless of or in spite of the ideology of its candidates. And the Harris campaign did that. They raised and spent $1.8 billion this cycle.
And now they're $20 million in debt.
The top pollsters, consultants, and strategists all profit handsomely from these campaigns. Then they often go work in the private sector, working for the very companies Democrats should be running against. I can say one thing. If Democrats can't answer this question, they may be in for more election nights in the future, like the one we witnessed on Tuesday.
Look, I agree with Eamon. He's the only MSNBC anchor that or host that I can stomach. Anyways, look, guys. Yeah, dance party with Beyonce is not cheap at all. So look, I think I've made my case. Inside liberalism is fascism, and that's coming either way. And we're going to look at bipartisan bills that, mobilize state violence here in a second. The Democratic Party and the top 1%, which both parties serve, will not save you. So speaking of both parties, let's turn to Trump. The Democrats are a collapsing party. A lot of their policy makers and decision makers believe that the high income base is their actual base, not grassroots, not the working classes. So I think they will obviously have more election nights that in the future, and they'll eventually become a non-viable party because, of course, the people who control the Democratic Party do not want economic populism. So Bernie-style stuff, regardless of how you feel about Sanders and his inability to call what's happening in Palestine a genocide, he will be blocked from access to political power. And a lot of the reasons why Trump's president again is because they chose to run Hillary Clinton because it was, quote, her turn. Was she the best candidate? No, but it was her turn. She was amongst the political aristocracy within America. And she lost, putting in Trump. And then, a lot of Democratic operatives, DNC operatives, have come forward and said the decision to throw Bernie Sanders under the bus and to run Biden was not because Biden was the only one who could defeat Trump. He was the only one who could defeat Bernie. And again, this is not an endorsement of Bernie freaking Sanders, but I'm just saying that's why the Democratic Party is going to collapse, because they have one agenda and they will only put forward candidates that push that agenda, the agenda of the 0.1% donor class. So, yeah. And now we can finally turn to Trump. As we outlined this, and again, the reason I spent the first half of this episode talking about this is because, what does a Trump presidency mean for the rest of the world? Well, at least for the rest of the Western world, y'all's politics are going to, in political movements, while different from our two-party system and while culturally different from what's going on in America, are going to follow these same trends, and it's going to have massive implications for the global South. So, look, as we outlined 7 definable policy positions of Donald Trump based off what he said, which you can take with an entire freaking salt shaker, let's look at them. All right, starting with the 88 billion migrant deportation plan, as they're calling it. And again, 88 billion is what they think it might take to get all the undocumented workers and illegal immigrants out of the United States.
Let me just drill down with you, because by some estimates, that mass deportation plan could cost as much as $88 billion a year just to deport 1 million people, Senator.
Yeah, the cost of deporting even 1 million people is insane.
Would you approve of a package that big, which would undoubtedly add to the national debt?
I agree with the president where we need to start. We need to start with the people who are felons, who have been left in this country, people who are on the terrorist watch list, people who have been convicted in other countries of murder and rape, people who are committing crimes in this country. That's the place to start, and that's where President Trump is about to start.
But let me just drill down with you, because
yeah. So that was a non-answer. I don't think that they will be able to do the whole crazy border thing because look, President-elect Trump has said he has no choice but to pursue mass deportation after the election results, and told NBC News that there is, quote, no price tag on on the operation. So on Sunday night, he named Tom Homan, the former acting director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as his administration's border czar. So Homan has vowed to run the largest deportation force in U.S. history and has said workplace operations will resume, which means they go and raid people's place of business and look for undocumented workers. If the plan targets undocumented workers and temporary workers in addition to migrants who have recently crossed the border, the construction industry will be hit hard, as will housing and agricultural sectors. So not only will it cost $88 billion to remove like 1 million undocumented workers, because you have to do intelligence operations, you have to find them, you have to track them, you have to transport them, you got to store them somewhere until you find, in concentration camps, essentially, which you have to build in order to send them back. And of course, increasing operations to the scale that they're talking about, building massive internment camps, which will, again, of course, eventually be used on, actual American citizens and political dissidents as this shit gets more and more fash. It costs a lot of money, So not only will it cost a lot of already taxpayer money, the construction industry will be hit hard, as will housing and agricultural systems. And illegal immigrants actually do pay taxes. They pay over $125 billion of taxes a year. So by one estimate from an immigration policy group, the GDP could shrink by 1.1 to 1.7 trillion. But in his recent comments, Trump has also said his plan will bring more businesses into the country, and the U.S. needs more workers to grow. There's really no sense in any of this policy. The anti-immigration stuff is a hallmark of these like authoritarian regimes that mobilize fear of the other, of foreign outsiders, people of color, in order to get the white folks to literally vote against their own interests, vote to imprison themselves, vote to bankrupt themselves, basically vote against their children's future. And of course, throughout history, if you look at Italy, Spain under Franco, Germany, all the same thing. The invective against immigrants, starting with undocumented, but then going up to actual legal citizens, begins. So, of course, we were already seeing that in Europe, but now that Trump's a president again, it's going to be only more emboldened. So check it out. When we said that Tom Homan, who said he was going to, conduct the largest deportation ever, he was the former head of that former head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement under, you guys can Google it pull up another tab. Maybe you guys want to Google who Tom Homan was, the former acting director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. What other administration did he work for? So should be interesting what the results say. So look, under Trump administration, the weaponization of state violence will not just fall on undocumented workers, but also the unhoused. Okay. Okay. So look, Trump says he will ban homeless camping and create tent cities. So Trump has proposed banning urban camping, arresting those who violate the ban, and offering them space in government-run tent cities staffed with doctors. Oh, that's so nice. And social workers. So just guys, keep in mind, please don't fall for this. I know you guys aren't, but what they're describing is an open-air prison camp. While it would be difficult for the federal government to do this directly, what's truly terrifying is that Trump is basically saying the same things as Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom in California. So this isn't an idea unique to Trump. Okay, Democrats in California have been salivating at the idea of shipping unhoused people from where we can see them into the desert for a long time. They've been wanting to do this for a long time. So The very well-funded landlord lobby has actually spent a lot of money in marketing the idea that the people on the streets who drowned under the pressure of sky-high rents are personally flawed. No reflection of the cruelty of our own housing market, of course. So police violence against immigrants, police violence against the unhoused, and soon police violence against activists. So Congress is about to gift Trump sweeping powers to crush his political enemies. You can pull up this article if you want it for a reference. The House is set to vote in their so you can pull that up if you want. This morning, Congress voted, still waiting on the results, on H.R. House Resolution 9495, a bipartisan act which includes provisions threatening to revoke the tax-exempt status of any nonprofit the government deems as a terrorist organization, a new legal category without any evidence necessary. So this is obviously a transparent attack on Muslim, Arab, Palestinian organizations in particular, as well as an attempt to silence any and all organizations that have condemned the ongoing genocide in Palestine. So to quote the House resolution, it would grant the Secretary of the Treasury Department unilateral authority to revoke the tax-exempt status of any nonprofit deemed to be a terrorist-supporting organization. So, they attached it. Okay, so it's also paired with a provision that would provide tax relief to American hostages held by terror groups and other Americans to unjustly imprisoned abroad. So that's a really popular provision, and they attached it to a super popular bill that everybody likes because they want to make it hard for people to say no. The reality is that if they really wanted the hostage thing to become law, they'd pass it by itself. So it's already illegal to intentionally provide support to terrorist organizations, obviously. But this bill takes away any necessity of showing intent, instead creating a new designation, terrorist supporting organizations. There's nothing in the bill that protects any nonprofit from this designation. So this will gut any material support for Muslim communities. And remember, guys, this is a bipartisan action. Everyone is terrified of Trump, but it will happen eventually either way. Y'all can't, I'm getting texted. Y'all can't talk about mass deportation. You can't talk about any of this, right? You can't talk about mass deportation without talking about Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama. The draconian moment we're in all around with all these different issues, with migration, homelessness, political activism, didn't fall out of the sky. As Harris said, you think it didn't just fall out of the coconut tree, all right? It took years and years of bipartisan, xenophobic, anti-progressive, anti-homeless collaboration. Again, because both parties, I'm having to spoon feed people like class consciousness in my own personal life. It's like both parties serve the top 1%. This is why we're spending so much time on this. Clinton and Bush set up the deportation machine, and Obama used it and took it further than ever before. Being apathetic during those years doesn't change the relentless terror that occurred. Where we are now is only shocking if you weren't paying attention. So Obama was called, if you guys recall, the deporter in chief. You know, it will take an effort to outdo what occurred under his presidency. Why do you think Trump is tapping someone from his administration? Nothing about any of this is surprising. So yeah, guys, Clinton's 1996 illegal immigration reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, Bush's focus on border security, and Obama's record on deportations all played a role in shaping the current situation. It's a complex issue with deep roots in both parties' past policies. Now, one final thing. There is one, like both Republicans and Democrats, generally, Republicans are worse, obviously, when it comes to like generally, literally anything. There is one thing that Trump might do differently, and that is with regards to the war in Ukraine.
I want to ask you, because you mentioned the foreign relations, is Trump already, like I mentioned, wasting no time as he spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday, discussed the war.
Okay, I don't want to be a dick. I can't help it. Why is that guy's head so thin? Anyways.
In Ukraine, can you detail more about what was involved in this call?
Well, this is a report. This is a report, Andy, coming from the Washington Post that has not been confirmed from the Trump team. In fact, in that Washington Post piece, it says that Ukraine was given a heads up because President-elect Trump had spoken to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky the day before. But the Ukrainian spokesman for the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry is saying that that call didn't take place. The call warning them about this call to Russian President Vladimir Putin. So the Trump team, we do have a statement from the Trump team. I won't read it, but I'll sum it up. They're neither confirming nor denying that this call took place Thursday between the president-elect and the Russian president. Trump communications director Stephen Chung saying they don't talk about these kind of private discussions. So they're not confirming it. They're not denying it. We do have this report from the Washington Post saying this call took place. Of course, one of the issues Donald Trump ran on was ending the Ukraine war. He said he had a plan to do it. We never heard the details about it. There's certainly a number of Republicans on Capitol Hill. We heard from Bill Haggard. He's saying he wanted to, cut some of that funding, said he had never voted for it. But Ukraine right now is losing territory. They've lost 57,000 soldiers over the past nearly 3 years. That's the same number the United States military lost in the Vietnam War. And there's a lot of concern that how much does Ukraine have left? It also remains to be seen what is President Biden going to do. Zelensky's been begging to send long-range weapons into Russia to take out some of these bases, launching some.
All right, that's getting into the strategic, tactical and strategic situation in Ukraine, which is beyond the scope of this particular episode, but we might do it Thursday or next week. So, first of all, this is an interesting aspect because Trump, when it comes to Ukraine, he is campaigning on a platform of being anti-war, anti-interventionalism, and he does differ a lot from other Republicans, like establishment Republicans, like Lindsey Graham, who said, look at all these natural resources and the Donbass, all the lithium and stuff. If we don't get it, Russia will. So we need to fight forever. He's also a huge bomb Iran talking head. So is Mitch McConnell. Mike Pompeo, former director of the CIA under Trump, I was concerned he was going to be put back into a cabinet position. As of right now, Pompeo is not getting back in. But that doesn't mean he's cutting out all war hawks from his cabinet and his policies. He said some vacillating things on Iran. He really doesn't like Iran, and so we might see conflict there. But he is, again, campaigning on a platform of being anti-war. We know from what he said and what he did during his presidency, increasing bomb yields dropped on Afghanistan and a number of other things, authorizing the assassination of General Soleimani. And so he's not necessarily anti-war, anti-interventionalism. He's got a bone to pick with Iran. So to say that he is an anti-war candidate just because he wants to be buddies with Putin or, at least respected by Putin, doesn't mean it's not going to cause the doomsday clock to move to the right, like 30 seconds to midnight. So, I don't buy for 1 second that he's necessarily like an anti-war candidate. He's just an anti-certain war. And he did say that a few months ago that, now that he's elected, the war in Ukraine, it will like end immediately. And then, of course, Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia said, no, it's not going to end. Like it's not going to end like when Donald Trump wants it to win. To end. That's just not going to happen. Russia's in a strong strategic position. So moving on with that, but he's going to get a lot of backlash and a lot of resistance, not just from the Democrats, but from some Republicans who want to keep that war going. So again, supporting Ukraine unconditionally is a very Democrat position. It's a very neoliberal position, but then again, it's shared by plenty of neocon Republicans as well. So the neolibs and the neocons are getting on board. They're passing these, that's with foreign policy. We've seen when it comes to like deportation, bipartisan, punishing homelessness, bipartisan, stifling political activism, bipartisan. So what does this mean for the rest of the world? Well, it's hard to say because we don't know what the frick Sorry, this is my Mint Press show, so I try not to curse. And I don't know why I said that. I sound like a nerd. But yeah, what the frick can, sorry, I lost my train of thought real quick. Okay, so no, it was, we don't know what Trump's going to do. And we can't really make an accurate assessment of what's going forward beyond this. Of course, we've examined how Democrats and liberalism always collapses into fascism. That was already going to happen. Now it's going to happen faster. Trump's an accelerationist, and he's going to embolden all these alt-right leaders in Europe, and that's going to have consequences for literally the entire world, because we're still not quite at a multipolar world order. It's still very unipolar and Western-centric. So I think the Trump presidency is going to be bad for everybody. And in the meantime, the Democrats try to have a veneer of progressivism for reasons that we already stated earlier in the episode. But the Republicans don't have that. So crackdowns on dissent going forward. Abortion is going to get a real run for its money. That those policies, because of the massive cultural influence and political influence that the U.S. has, expect that in other countries as well. Maybe Trump will defund NATO. I doubt it, because the president doesn't really just control everything. He'll take a tough stance on NATO like he did last time, and of course, a lot of the isolationists on the right, because again, people on the right are not a monolith, just like people on the left. I do think centrists are, very similar because they're centrists, but some people on the right, many people on the right, have an isolationist bent. So they want NATO to stop existing, or they at least don't want to be part of it, which is like, cool, I can work with that. But beyond that, the emboldening of right-wing politics and, one thing before we end and go into the Q&A, I think that it will be easier to get former disaffected Trump voters and flip them to the movement than it will be liberals. Just think about that. It'll be easier to flip them. I've had more success, and I get it. I'm a white dude and a veteran, so at least they give me the time of day. But it will be easier to flip disaffected Trump voters, I believe. So, one second. There's really not much hope I have for people who are still, after this flawless campaign, still simping for the Democrats. Like, if you don't realize what their party is and what that party is by now, at least the Republicans, at least the people who voted for Trump, like, they're wrong about everything, but at least they know there's something deeply establishment and deeply corrupt about the Democratic Party. And of course, so is the Republicans, but for different reasons. Well, shades of gray, all shades of liberal capitalism. So, someone just said Happy Veterans Day. Yeah, thanks, man. I think this is the only way to be celebrating Veterans Day. It's that to be railing against the war machine. Because, really, based off of, everything that happened after World War II, if we were living in a just non-militant society, there wouldn't really be a Veterans Day or a reason to have it. So, thanks. But, yeah, let's get to the Q&A. Hungary is happy about Trump. I know. I'm sorry if you live there. Yeah. And then, and they're honest about what they hate. They don't wait until after the election to go to Starbucks. Yeah, that's what Malcolm X said. The conservatives are the wolf, you know what he's about, and liberals are the fox. Just same appetite. Just they're smiling at you. So, capitalism leads to innovation. It innovates only what is profitable and manipulates a need for it after. Dude, did you know that literally nothing was invented until 400 years ago? There weren't wheels. There weren't beds. There weren't swords. There weren't books. There was no art. There was nothing before capitalism. Thanks, Robin0608 for that penetrating insight. So, what I hate, what I hate about exit polls. Okay. What I hate about exit polls is it's never normalized. Like it says X% of black voters voted a certain way, but you always need to put that next to what was the turnout of black voters, etc. Yeah, which is why they try to like take an average of exit polls, but still, like the data is not solid. It never has been. I didn't look at polls the entire election, and I imagine everybody did. Like Harris is going to lose. I don't need polling data for that. So I just need to, not be a smug asshole to, be able to empathize with other people who are disaffected with Harris. Yeah. Are they, a lot of them racist and hugely misogynistic? Absolutely. But, we didn't know. We just had to look at the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign and the tenor of the American people. And, you kind of got it coming. And of course, her not distancing herself from the genocide in Palestine was a big deal. So Roland S. Martin pointed out that the reason why Biden won in 2020 was because he's a white male. Yeah, that helps. That really helps. And a lot of people were pissed off at Trump. Harris didn't carry those white voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Yeah. I mean, look, no one's arguing that racism and misogyny isn't part of this. You would be insane to argue that. The only thing, and the reason I harp on the class consciousness is because it's something liberals will never talk about, and it's why they won't win elections. And that's why they're going to continue to get swept. But yeah, no one's denying that that's one of the major, if not one of the biggest contributing reasons to why she didn't win and why Biden did win. Where did the 11 million votes go? Were all those voters too busy smoking grass, and then all of a sudden they're like, oops, I forgot to vote. Where do I vote? Is this election day? So yeah, there's the available data says 11. Yeah, there was a far less voter turnout, especially for the Democrats than the Republicans. Yeah. Where did they go? I'll just say this. I can't answer the question. We don't know why people didn't vote or didn't choose to vote. I have theories. They have to do with the Democratic elite crafting the policy of the Harris campaign and having nothing to offer to working people of all races. And I think being attached to a genocide and a war machine wasn't helpful. Also, being a black woman was not helpful. And I don't mean to frame it like that, but like, that's one of the reasons. Like, no one's saying that that's not a thing. And yeah, people are just like, a lot of people are also disenfranchised by the electoral system. They didn't show up for the popular vote because they're like, I live in Texas. Like, why? It's a red state. My vote doesn't matter. And if you're generally a left-leaning person, the Dems usually win the popular vote. So I can see why people wouldn't go, because their vote, unless you're voting in local elections and Senate races and stuff, it literally doesn't matter. And I think people are just so disillusioned with the system as a whole that they're like, whatever, man, I don't even want to deal with this. So I think it's, that's not the way I would go, but I understand it. So I think that's a big part of my worldview around why a lot of people didn't show up to vote. This is all to divert hate onto immigrants for the economic crash resulting from attacking Iran. Look, if we're talking about fascism, look, you always got to blame immigrants and outsiders. And also you have to have an enemy that is at one time all powerful, but on the verge of collapse, which is what Harris said about Iran. Iran's our greatest adversary. But it's our greatest adversary, but it's a post-revolutionary state, and the people are about to rise up because of all the human rights violations it's doing. And at the same time, while it's a weak post-revolutionary state, it's our greatest adversary because it controls the octopus of terror and is able to destabilize and power project across the entire Middle East. So yeah, so like that's what fascist people need. They need an enemy that's incredibly powerful to scare you, scare you with terrorist attacks on your own soil, but also weak enough that we can actually go to war with them and win. So yeah. Immigrants having an all-powerful, weak adversary. Look, just turn your critical thinking skills off, guys. Maybe you'll be able to vote Democrat or Republican. You just don't need to think. 10 cities is the new FEMA camps. Yeah, well, also these 10 cities would be a great place to find an exploitable labor force. If you can't get them into prisons to do your exploited labor, your slave labor, I don't know. I think some capitalist, innovative CEO from like a contractor company is going to be like, hey, what are these homeless people doing? Like, they live in government subsidized tent cities, so we don't really need to pay them benefits. We actually really don't need to pay them at all. Like, actually, they should probably work in order to be able to stay in these tent cities. So fun thing to look forward to in 4 years. Homelessness will become more common once the cost of living spikes again. I mean, over half Americans don't even have $500 as emergency funds for unemployment, rent arrears. Yeah, most Americans don't even have $500 for emergency funds. So I'm sure placing massive tariffs on China and other foreign trade, will be very helpful for you. Just saving up a couple extra bucks here and there for your emergency fund. Yeah, it's going to get way worse. Yeah, as a black person, I was astounded by the arrogance and cluelessness of black Democrats. Look, that's beyond my lane. I just, as a white dude activist, I generally just state a military and geopolitical analysis. But yeah, I guess it was disappointing to see not just black people, but also former like allies that were white going back to Starbucks. But it just goes to show you that, if you lean back into capitalism, the exploitative capitalist system that is not just exploiting you, but also committing a genocide in West Asia as a FU, like, I'll show you by going to Starbucks because Harris didn't get elected. But of course, I'm not going to deal with the fact that Starbucks has contributed to right-wing candidates and to Trump's campaign. But, sure, guys, you got us. It just shows you that they were never allies or supporters or comrades to begin with. So let them have their revenge fraps. Really, that we don't need them. All right, guys. Well, that was our episode about things to look forward to with the Trump presidency and how, in general, vague ways, it's going to impact the rest of the world. So if you think this was helpful, send this to a friend. We're trying to push this out into the algorithm, and we'll see you next time. Looks like it's going to be Thursday. Not sure what the subject matter is going to be, but thanks so much for showing up. Thanks for your questions, and we will see you next time on State of Play at Mint Press News. Cheers, y'all. Have a good night.